Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in a special edition for our News Nuggets and Insights. Today is July 3rd, and this is our July 4th special for 2020.
One nation, under God. A nation forged on the sacrifice of pilgrims, pioneers, and patriots. Men and women who trusted God, who knew creation had much to offer, and who believed in something bigger than themselves. A nation grown strong through the vision of inventors, idealists, and innovators. We've given humanity wings, even sent them to the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We've done the impossible and haven't been afraid to roll up our sleeves and do the hard work.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
And above all, we thank God for our Christian foundation, the strength of our nation, and the many blessings He's bestowed upon our sweet land of liberty. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. God bless America.
And now, from God's Unchanging Word Studios in New Orleans, we are pleased to bring you news, nuggets, and insights with today's host, Tom Carey.
Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to God's Unchanging Word in another edition for our News, Nuggets, and Insights. And today is Friday, July 3rd, 2020, and this is our special July 4th edition for our program today. Today we're going to talk about the culture change, but we're not going to spend a lot of time there. We want to spend more time today talking about some of the blessings and some of the positive things that God's given us in this great nation, but we also want to talk about what it is we're losing if we're not careful about what's really going on. Then we're going to go into America, remembering our culture, and we're going to use a number of videos today. Some of the old we've played in the past, old-time favorites, and we'll get some new ones that you hadn't seen before. And then we're going to tie it all into the warning that God gave us for America on July 4th, 1776, Tammuz. So now let's begin with one of our old-time favorites, John Wayne. Now, I don't know if you know this or not, but there's a song out right now that said John Wayne is a Nazi. You can mess with a lot of things, but you don't mess with the Duke. This is John Wayne. Let's take a look at this video about why he loves America.
You ask me why I love her? Well, give me time and I'll explain. Have you seen a Kansas sunset or an Arizona rain? Have you drifted on a bayou down Louisiana way? Have you watched the cold fog drifting over San Francisco Bay? Have you heard a Bob White calling in the Carolina pines, or heard the bellow of a diesel in the Appalachia mines? Does the call of the Niagara thrill you when you hear her waters roar? You look with awe and wonder at her Massachusetts shore, where men who braved a hard new world first stepped on Plymouth Rock. Do you think of them when you stroll along a New York City dock? Have you seen a snowflake drifting in the Rockies way up high? Have you seen the sun come blazing down from a bright Nevada sky? You hail to the Columbia as she rushes in the sea, or bow your head at Gettysburg, our struggle to be free? Have you seen the mighty Tetons who watched an eagle soar? Have you seen the Mississippi roll along Missouri's shore? Have you felt a chill at Michigan when on a winter's day her waters rage along the shore in thunderous display? Does the word aloha make you warm? Do you stare in disbelief when you see the surf come roaring in at Waimea Reef? From Alaska's cold to the Everglades, from the Rio Grande to Maine, my heart cries out, my pulse runs fast, the might of her domain. You ask me why I love her? I've a million reasons why. My beautiful America, beneath God's wide, wide sky.
Now, we've got one more that we've played in the past, and I know you're going to love. I actually played both of these videos in a sermon intro that we did last week. So if you're seeing this, well, we're playing them again because a lot of people don't catch everything at the same time. So these are two favorites that we've played over the last couple of years that people really, really like, and especially Red Skelton, because it takes us from a time that we were only 48 states to 50 states, and shows us that we are the nation of freedom, 50 being the Jubilee, and God says freedom. So the United States is at that stage that we need to be concerned about, because somebody's trying to put in a 51st state now. Unbelievable. Let's play Red Skelton. I'll be right back.
I remember a teacher that I had. Now, I went through the 7th grade. I went to the 7th grade. I left home when I was 10 years old because I was hungry. And I used to, this is true. I work in the summer and I go to school in the winter. But I had this one teacher. He was the principal of the Harrison School in Vincennes, Indiana. To me, this was the greatest teacher, a real sage of my time, anyhow. He had such wisdom. And we were all reciting the Pledge of Allegiance one day. And he walked over, this little old teacher, Mr. Laswell was his name. Mr. Laswell, he says, he says, I've been listening to you boys and girls recite the Pledge of Allegiance all semester, and it seems as though it's becoming monotonous to you. If I may I recite it and try to explain to you the meaning of each word. I, me, an individual, a committee of one, pledge, dedicate all of my worldly goods to give without self-pity, allegiance, my love and my devotion to the flag, our standard, Old Glory, a symbol of freedom. Wherever she waves, there's respect, because your loyalty has given her a dignity that shouts, freedom is everybody's job. United. That means that we have all come together. States, individual communities that have united into 48 great states. 48 individual communities with pride and dignity and purpose, all divided with imaginary boundaries, yet united to a common purpose, and that's love for country. And to the republic, a state in which sovereign power is invested in representatives chosen by the people to govern. And government is the people, and it's from the people to the leaders, not from the leaders to the people, for which it stands. One nation, meaning so blessed by God, indivisible, incapable of being divided, with liberty, which is freedom, the right of power to live one's own life without threats, fear, or some sort of retaliation, and justice, the principle or qualities of dealing fairly with others, for all, which means, boys and girls, it's as much your country as it is mine. And now, boys and girls, let me hear you recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Since I was a small boy, 2 states have been added to our country, and 2 words have been added to the Pledge of Allegiance: under God. Wouldn't it be a pity if someone said that is a prayer and that would be eliminated from schools too?
Well, it is a pity, because it has been eliminated from nearly all of our schools, and especially the public school system. Let's move on now. Let's talk about what's the ultimate goal of all the protests that's taking place today. Trying to pinpoint this, now it's elusive. When you see what's going on in around the country and all the protests, it keeps moving. You know, I said, how do you describe it? So I said it's like trying to nail Jell-O to the wall. So I'm going to just give you 3 examples right now. We're going to talk more about this next time, but I just want to show you the ultimate end game for what's going on right now, what Satan's trying to do to our great nation. All right, so we're just going to take 3 protests. What began as a protest against police brutality and against people of color has evolved into losing our heritage. All right, so before I get into that, I'm going to show you this video that's coming up, and I call it the slippery slope. All right, let's play the slippery slope, and I'll come back to our 3 principles.
I have already lived through this thing when I was living in Venezuela. Statues came down. Chavez didn't want that history displayed. And then he changed the street names. Then came the curriculum. You guys think it can happen to you? I've heard this so many times. But always be on guard. Never believe something can't happen to you. You need to guard your country and your society, or it will be destroyed.
That prescient warning from my next guest went viral, and it's not hard at all to see why. Marxists tore apart Venezuela in the 90s and took it from Latin America's richest and most stable democracy to the poverty-stricken dystopia it is today. Now, Venezuela isn't the only country to see this happen, and let's make sure we're not next. Venezuelan activist Elizabeth Ragliani joins me now. Elizabeth, you made quite a statement in your video. Yes. What is America, especially the American youth that are treating this like this is a carnival, like a social, social justice experiment in their new entertainment? What are they missing?
I don't think they're seeing what's going to happen next, because they're thinking these are just symbols of oppression. But I had a lot of friends that told me, oh, it's just the Confederate statues. And I said, no, it's not going to be just the Confederate statues. Just wait and see. This is a slippery slope. The next thing is going to be all the symbols of the United States. Founding fathers are going to be attacked. Religious symbols are going to be attacked. And next, probably museums. I mean, anything can be attacked if you just let it happen. If you just let the first ones come down, then nothing. There's no limits to what's next.
Governor Cuomo, Elizabeth, is basically saying that, like, this is just free expression. It's a good thing. Watch.
People are making a statement about equality, about community, to be against racism, against slavery. I think those are good statements, and it depends, can you overdo it? Of course you can. But in New York, I don't think we've overdone it, and I think it's a healthy expression of people saying, let's get some priorities here.
A healthy expression, Elizabeth? Is that where we're headed when all this is said and done?
No, it is not. It's a cultural revolution. It's an attempt to change the identity of the country. That's my opinion. And that's what they did to us. Of course, it was different. At that point, they already had taken the government. But at this point, they're trying to change the national identity, and they're trying to destroy the system. And if they get to the government, they'll do it. They certainly will do it. Another of those videos that I made on TikTok, I was talking about how the Venezuelan regime was involved in the protests that are going on now, and we saw the evidence of the BLM founders being an ally to the Venezuelan regime. I saw pictures of them in 2015 where Opal Tometi, one of the co-founders of the BLM movement, went to Venezuela and called and said that she was happy to be in a place with intelligent political discourse. That just tells me
you cannot make it up. Elizabeth, we're going to stay in touch with you and connected to you. Great analysis. Thank you for making us think about this.
Well, there's a young lady that's actually lived through a cultural change. Look at Venezuela today. Basically, that's what the United States is going through. But it's not just a cultural change. This is beyond the physical. This is in a spiritual realm of where God's going. I'm just going to bring you 3 points, and I'll talk about that more as we go into the future, because there's going to be plenty of time to talk about this, believe me. This is not settling down any time in the near future. The removal of statutes, it went now to removing of the 10 Commandments statute. Now what oppression is that? A Montana man charged with toppling the 10 Commandments monument. The Montana police arrested a man who they say pulled down the courthouse 10 Commandments with a chain in a pickup truck, according to reports. Now, I've already played the video, so I don't believe we need to play this video, so I'm going to go ahead and move on now. 2, Shaun King. Shaun King, civil rights activist, he's probably the most known right now what's going on. He said the white Jesus must go. And what people don't realize is what they're looking at is the lineage back to Abraham and the promises of God. But people only understand that as being the white race. So that's where the problem comes in. Regarding his support for the tearing down of the images of Christ, Mr. King said yes. All murals, stained glass windows of white Jesus and his European mother and their white friends should also come down. They're a gross form of white supremacy created as tools of oppression, racist propaganda, and they should all come down. Well, what do you say to something like that? All right, let's go to number 3, the ultimate goal. Here's the ultimate goal. If this country doesn't give us what we want, then this is the most recent, then we will burn down this system and we will replace it, said Hawk Newsom, chairman of the Black Lives Matter of Greater New York, during an interview with Fox News. He says, I could be speaking figuratively, I could be speaking literally, it's a matter of interpretation. He says now, this is the bold headline that came out, we will burn the system down if the U.S. doesn't give us what we want. Now, what's interesting is that burning it all down is what Peter talks about. He says, when you see all these things coming to pass, he says that all of this is going to melt away with a fervent heat. And what I introduced in the sermon last week was what Satan is doing today is trying to reverse his fate and his demons to turn it around to this society and our nation that God is using now to proclaim the end-time warning and the return of Jesus Christ. Now, that message is not being taught out in the world because they don't understand it yet. Many people will. But that is the ultimate goal of where it's going out. So what are his demands? Now, this is the Jell-O, sticking the Jell-O on the wall. So take a look at these demands, because there's many Black Lives chapters. Everyone works together and independently of each other. But this is one of the most recent. Trying to pinpoint this is like trying to stick Jell-O on the wall. This is from the group called the Movement for Black Lives Matter. This was the list of demands that they just put out. Reparations, no bail. Release all prostitutes from jail. I had to stop there. It's like, what has that got to do with? I don't know. No death penalty. Free education. Free health care. Defund the police. Cut the military budget. The military budget? Redistribute the wealth. Now, this is a problem that we see at the end time when you talk about Babylon, because Babylon, the government, world government, comes in and goes into the redistribution of wealth around the world, and that is the green movement. So that's where this goes to. And then have publicly financed campaigns. So it's not just about, oh, by the way, who was the guy that this whole thing started with? Where's his name there? You don't see any of that anymore, do you? It has moved on to political statements. It's about the nation. It's about removing what's going on. It's anarchism that's coming to the rise of what we're looking at today. We're going to talk more about that in the future. But so now, I wanted to introduce the culture we're losing, and now let's talk about the culture God gave us. It is freedom. All right, this is a brand new series that I just began last Sabbath, right? It's called Freedom on the Edge of Eternity, talking about preparing to cross the Jordan. Now, this is the card. So if you're on the mailing list, you're going to be getting this in the mail, and you probably have gotten it just in the last day or two. It's called Freedom on the Edge of Eternity. It's connecting the dots of our plight to that of the Israelites before they entered the Promised Land. The duality of the events that's going to take place, the battles that we're going to have to fight as God's people at this end time, are so pertinent to the future of God's people that it needs to be told. And we're going to tell that story now in a multi-part sermon that I just began with just the introduction last week. So the next time I pick up, I'll do part 2. Now, I don't know how long it's going to be. It could be 3, it could be 4 parts. But we're going to go into the specifics that's going to help us to understand where we're going in this time. So now, America, one nation under God, understanding our roots. We got another little video here that you haven't seen before. This is called America, Founded on Christian Values. If we're ready, let's play that video.
It's been said that it's easy to lose touch with who you really are when you forget where it is you have come from. I have carefully examined the evidences of the Christian religion, and if I was sitting as a juror upon its authenticity, I would unhesitatingly give my verdict in its favor. I can prove its truth as clearly as any proposition ever submitted to the mind of man. Alexander Hamilton.
The future and success of America is not in this Constitution, but in the laws of God upon which this Constitution is founded. James Madison.
The reason that Christianity is the best friend of the government is because Christianity is the only religion that changes the heart. Thomas Jefferson.
The Bible is the rock upon which this republic stands. Andrew Jackson.
It cannot be emphasized too strongly or too often that this great nation was founded not by religionists but by Christians, not on religions but on the gospel of Jesus Christ. For this very reason, peoples of other faiths have been afforded asylum, prosperity, and freedom of worship here. Patrick Henry.
If we abide by the principles taught in the Bible, our country will go on prospering and to prosper.
But if we and our posterity neglect its instruction and authority, no man can tell how sudden a catastrophe may overwhelm us and bury all our glory in profound obscurity. Daniel Webster.
America was born a Christian nation. America was born to exemplify the devotion to the elements of righteousness which are derived from the revelations of Holy Scriptures. That if they would see America free and pure, they will make their own spirits free and pure by this baptism of the Holy Spirit. Woodrow Wilson.
When we look at our roots, it's hard to imagine that anybody can say that we didn't have a Christian foundation or that church and government was separated from the very beginning. They just don't understand our history. America, where's my A? There it is. On the path of the destruction of ancient Israel. So that's where we're heading to. We're on the same path that ancient Israel went to. We're going to talk about that in the second half of the program in our nuggets. So let me give you a little introduction here. Israel had just received God's laws and his ordinance at Mount Sinai. Moses had just finished giving the people the commandments and the ordinance as instructed when God tells him to come up to the mount. It was the day following, the day that we understand today is Pentecost. It was the 50th day since they began their journey out of Egypt. Moses is up in the mount for 40 days, as we see in Exodus 24:18, and Israel decides to build a golden calf. They had just left Egypt. They said, whatever happened to this Moses, we don't know. All the miracles they saw, the crossing of the sea. Can you imagine that fast to forget that? But they did. God on the mount, burning, the shaking, they heard the voice of God. And they said, Moses, that's too much. You talk to us, don't let God or we're going to die. And just 40 days later, they tell Aaron, we don't know what happened to this guy Moses. Who is he anyway? You make us a god and bring us back to Egypt. Can you believe that? And you go back to Exodus chapter 3, and they said that God says, I heard the plea of my people, and he's down to rescue them. So now here's the mystery that a lot of people don't understand. When you count the days of God's calendar, from the day Moses goes up until he comes down on the golden calf, you come to the date of Tammuz 17 on God's calendar. What has that got to do with the connection to America? Now, if you've been following our program for any length of time in the last couple of years, you probably know what I'm about to. But if you're new, you're going to be awakened to something you never heard before. And we'll talk about that when we come back. July 4th and Tammuz 17. But we're going to give you a little video here. It's around 5 minutes long. It's from PragerU. And what this does, it talks about an event that was prevented that helped establish America down the road. Take a look. I'll be right back.
What is the most important date in American history? July 4th, 1776, the date of American independence? Or April 12, 1861, the first day of the Civil War that ended slavery in America? Or maybe December 7th, 1941, the day the Japanese Empire bombed Pearl Harbor, bringing America into World War II. Or how about this one? July 28th, 1588. Yes, 1588. That's 30 years before Plymouth Rock and almost 20 years before Jamestown, John Smith, and Pocahontas. So why is it such an important date in American history? First, a little background. In 1588, the most powerful man in the world was the King of Spain, Philip II. Flush with gold and silver from the New World, he had no rival save one, Queen Elizabeth of England. England was a Protestant nation, and Spain was Catholic, as was most of Europe. In addition to considering her a heretic, Philip hated her for two additional reasons. First, she was financing a rebellion by the Dutch Protestants against Spain in the Spanish Netherlands, which Philip controlled. And second, because she had executed her rebellious cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary, like Philip, was a Catholic monarch. Philip felt that Mary, not Elizabeth, was the rightful heir to the English throne. Philip felt that with the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, Elizabeth had gone too far. The time had come, he decided, to discipline her and her heretic nation. He came up with an audacious plan. He would invade England. To do this, he needed a large army and lots of ships. He needed an armada. 130 ships that would carry 30,000 men. Philip was very rich, but not that rich. To build such a fleet, he would have to borrow heavily. But this wasn't much of an obstacle. Once he had conquered England, he could use the English treasury to pay off any debts. The Pope, wishing to see England return to the Catholic fold, promised additional financing. So the ships were built, the soldiers recruited. Most importantly, Philip had chosen a competent man to lead them, the Marquis de Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz asked for more time to prepare his ships and men. But Philip was impatient, far too impatient as it turned out. In a massive stroke of misfortune, the first of many, Santa Cruz died just before the Armada was set to sail. Rather than take the time to seek a new suitable replacement, Philip pushed ahead and appointed Duke Medina Sidonia to take command. There was only one problem. Sidonia was an army general. He had no naval experience. In fact, he had never been out to sea. You can't hide 130 ships and 30,000 men. The English knew the Spanish were coming, and they were ready for them. What they lacked in firepower, they made up in maneuverability, familiarity with the treacherous English Channel, and the most capable and creative sea commanders of the age. Lord High Admiral Howard, Sir John Hawkins, and Sir Francis Drake. They knew they couldn't win a shootout with the Spanish. So instead, they launched a preemptive attack on the Spanish fleet while it was still docked in the French port of Calais. Setting a number of their own ships on fire, they sailed them into the port. The Spanish cut their anchors to flee the flaming English ships. But in their panic, they only made matters worse. The Spanish ships rammed into each other, tangling riggings, slicing sails, and crushing hulls. The vessels that weren't damaged were sitting ducks for the English cannon. Seeing that England had blocked their escape back to Spain, the badly wounded Armada sailed north into the Atlantic, hoping to regroup. But then the weather turned, and Mother Nature finished what the English had started. When it was all over, only 76 of the 130 Spanish ships returned home, and half of the 30,000 men were now at the bottom of the ocean floor. Spain never challenged England again. Spain never challenged anyone again. It was finished as a great power. So why was the defeat of the Spanish Armada so important to American history? If the Armada had won, England would have become part of the Spanish Empire. There would have been no further English exploration of the North American coastline. In all likelihood, Spain, not England, would have colonized the eastern seaboard and expanded westward. Spain would have ruled America as it did South America. There would have been no 13 colonies, no 13 original United States. The America that we know would not exist. Without a United States of America, there would be no Declaration of Independence, no Constitution, no Bill of Rights. The whole concept of American democracy, an idea that profoundly changed human history, would be unknown. The defeat of the Spanish Armada on July 28, 1588, made America possible. I'm Richard McMillan, Professor of History at Pierce College for Prager University.
You just never know how God's hand is in the fate of mankind to orchestrate what he wants to bring about his plan for salvation. What about you? Have you ever wondered what's going on in your life and how God has directed you to things to study that you never knew before? And why you see things in the Bible that maybe your friends don't see, or maybe your family doesn't see? And wonder why this happened to you that you just can't explain? Well, sometimes it's because God has a plan for you. All right, let's move on. All right, let's move on now. Now we're into our Nuggets portion of the program, and we're going to talk about July 4th, 1776, and Tammuz 17. Believe it or not, July 4th, 2015 was also Tammuz 17. You see, we live on the Roman calendar, but God has never lost track of His calendar, and He does things on His time and in His calendar and in His plan. And if we want to know what He's going to do, we have to go to His plan to understand what's going on. We pick up the story with Jacob wrestling with God in the beginning of the name of Israel. So he said, "Let me go, for the day breaks." Remember, Jacob had wrestled with God all night long, and he just struggled. And finally, the day was breaking, and the person he's wrestling with says, "Let me go." And Jacob says, "I'll not let you go till you bless me." He says, "I will not let you go except you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince you have power with God and with men, and have prevailed," God said. So now we begin to see the first name of Israel in the Bible is given to Jacob, and Jacob and Israel are the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob and Israel's name. Look what God says here in Genesis 48. "The angel which hath redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads," talking about Joseph's brothers, Ephraim and Manasseh. This is the time when the blessings were being poured out and explained on each one of the sons which became the tribes of Israel. He says, "And let my name be on them." So the name of Israel, this is very important. And we don't have that time in this program, but we covered in many of our series about who Israel is today. And we believe, from all the information we receive, from the promises that God has laid out, that the United States and Great Britain fulfills the bill of the promises to Ephraim and Manasseh. All right, those are Joseph's sons. And God says here, "Let my name, Israel's name, be on them." So people don't realize it, that with the United States is the modern day Israel. It isn't the type. It's the modern day Israel fulfills the blessings that God prescribed in the Old Testament. Now you might say, well, what about Israel over in the Middle East? Well, that is the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, where Benjamin was the tribe that God separated with the tribes of Levi in the Old Testament, and many of the tribes of the Levitical priesthood, or with those. Those are the two nations that separated in the Old Testament. The tribe of Judah and the tribes of Israel, the 10 lost tribes, which people don't know who they are today. So when you wonder about the battles that's taking place, they don't realize the heritage problem that they're fighting with is the modern day Israelites, those who are born and those who are grafted in. That is what's going on, because see, God's going to bring about His return, and He's using this great nation to proclaim the warning message of Jesus Christ coming back. So "Let my name be on them," He says, "in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." And that's what we're looking at today. You can find those blessings on the tribes in Genesis chapter 49 of all of the tribes. So now, this is very important, because you say, well, Israel is over in the Middle East. The United States can't be Israel. But it can. And here's why. You find it in 2 Samuel chapter 7, verse 10. "Moreover," this is talking to King David, "I will appoint a place for my people Israel, and I will plant them, and they will dwell in a place of their own, and move no more. And neither shall the children of wickedness afflict them any more as before time." So we're looking at is the type, the physical type that God's telling King David. King David is in the promised land. He's in where God told him to be. But God's telling him, "I'm going to move you again." Because see, there was an end time promise that could only be fulfilled through the promises of Abraham that's come about in the United States. There's no other place on the face of this earth fulfills those blessings as prescribed in Genesis. So when you talk about the United States and all the people are trying to tear it down, remember what God says. Those who bless Israel will be blessed. Those who curses Israel will be cursed. And the people who are trying to tear down this nation, God says He's going to curse them, because this is Israel. And if you want to be blessed, you need to understand you have to bless Israel. You cannot tear down the nature and the culture that God established without being cursed. And this world doesn't get it. They don't understand who they are. Now, how does this tie in with the United States of 1776? One of the most amazing stories that God brought about is that the foundation of this nation, almost 4,000 years after Abraham, comes to be on July 4, 1776. The actual date of the Declaration of Independence, believe it or not, was July 2nd. They had to go back and they had to rework it, and 2 days later they actually brought it to pass. The actual birth date of the American Republic was July 2nd, 1776. That's when the delegates of the Continental Congress, meeting at the Pennsylvania State House in Philadelphia, approved the resolution and introduced on June 7th, 1776, calling for the independence from Great Britain. So June 7th, they bring about the calling of it. They put it together on July 2nd. Look at this note. It says that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. 2 days later, the body adopted the more well-known Declaration of Independence, which is justified by the deed of declaring the causes which impel them to the separation. It's almost like now we have to call another Declaration of Independence to separate us from our own government. What's going on right now? Got another short little video. You probably haven't seen this. It's a few years old, so the quality is not as good as some of the newer ones, but this is one on America's Godly Heritage by none other than David Barton of Wall Builders. Let's play that.
Does America really have a godly heritage? Indeed it does. Abundant documentary evidence of that fact is available in tens of thousands of historic documents. In fact, the history in and around just this one building clearly demonstrates America's godly heritage. This is Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American liberty and the cradle of American constitutional government. It was here on July the 2nd, 1776, that our founding fathers in the Continental Congress approved a complete separation from Great Britain. It was 2 days later, on the 4th of July, that they approved the Declaration of Independence, and then 4 days after that, on the 8th of July, they took that new declaration, they walked outside, they stood on the steps of Independence Hall, and they read that new declaration to the crowd that was assembled around the building. This is Carpenter's Hall. This is the building in which the very first American Congress met, even 2 years before they declared independence. In 1774, as the 13 colonies saw the approaching conflict with Great Britain, 40 of America's leading statesmen gathered here in preparation for that coming conflict. Those 40 luminaries included individuals such as Patrick Henry, John Adams, George Washington, John Jay, Samuel Adams, and many others. Now, most of those 40 had never met each other before they gathered here, so when they assembled here for the first time, what'd they do? They opened with prayer, right here. But it was not a dinky little superficial type of prayer like might be prayed at a public gathering today. No, it was a profound time of prayer. It was led by the Reverend Jacob Duché, a nearby minister from local Christ Church just a couple blocks away. Of that time of prayer, John Adams reported,
"The Reverend Duché, unexpectedly to everybody, struck out into an extemporary prayer which filled the bosom of every man present. I must confess I never heard a better prayer, with such fervor, such ardor, such earnestness and pathos, and in language so elegant and sublime for America and for the Congress. It has had an excellent effect upon everybody here."
Silas Deane, who became a famous American diplomat, was also a member of that first Congress, and he said that it was, quote,
"a prayer worth riding 100 miles to hear."
That is, it was worth spending 3 days on horseback to arrive in time for that prayer. So profound was the prayer that Deane reported, quote,
"Even Quakers shed tears."
In addition to the momentous time of prayer that morning, Congress also read from 4 chapters in the Bible. One of those chapters, Psalm 35, had particularly impacted the group. As John Adams reported to his wife Abigail,
"I never saw a greater effect upon an audience. It seemed as if heaven had ordained that psalm to be read on the morning. I must beg you to read that psalm."
Numerous other delegates also commented on that profound time of prayer and Bible study here at Carpenter's Hall, which is yet another clear reminder of America's godly heritage.
You know, I'm sitting there watching that video, I'm thinking like, boy, they better put some troops around those buildings. They'd be tearing those things down and burning them down before this is all over with. But you can see the roots of America, how God intervened, and that its roots go back to God. And through God's blessings, how they brought all this about. So now, 2015, let's talk about 2015. We're going to talk about the warnings for America and July 4, 1776, how all of this pulls in together. Remember I showed you about building that calf? At the very foundation of Israel being established, coming out of Egypt, they went back and they turned against God. God gives America those same warnings because it is established July 4th, 1776. That year was Tammuz 17. So we're established on the very same day as a warning, just like ancient Israel did. So in 2015, June 26, that day will live in infamy in this nation, on June 15, that is the day that the United States Congress approved same-sex marriage, right? That was called Tammuz 9. We'll come to that in just a second. That very same year, July 4th, on God's calendar, was Tammuz 17. What is so amazing that this event was only the 8th time that that event had ever fallen on July 4th since 1776. 8 being the beginning. So we had in our sermons back in 2015 felt that God had finally began the final phase of his return of Jesus Christ. What do these two dates have in common? In the tying in with ancient Israel? In the Old Testament, the breaching of the walls of Jerusalem took place in Babylon on Tammuz 9 on God's calendar. In the New Testament, the new temple fell, the breaching of the walls began on Tammuz 17, and both of those temples found on the 9th of Av, all at the same time. And I believe what God has showed us from this connection, the warning of America being established on July 4th, that if we ever turn back from God, just like God warned ancient Israel, he said that God would turn his back on us. And that is where we are today. The Declaration that was approved on July 2nd, 1776, is the day after Congress voted to declare independence. John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, declaring that the second day of July 1776 will be the most memorable epoch in the history of America. See, he thought it was going to be July 2nd would be the day of the Declaration, but it wasn't, because that evening they went back and had to rewrite a few phrases inside of that Declaration. He says, I am apt to believe that it will be celebrated by succeeding generations as a great anniversary festival. It ought to be commemorated as the day of deliverance by solemn acts of devotion to Almighty God, he wrote. He said it ought to be solemnized with pomp and parade and shoes and games and sports and guns and bells and bonfires, he says, and illuminations from the end of this continent to the other end of time, from this time forward and forevermore. And he honestly thought it would be July 2nd that would be taking place. And as we know now, looking back, it is actually July 4th. There's another coming day of freedom. Jesus Christ is coming back. And he's going to take all this nonsense that's going on today, and he's going to put it down, and he's going to establish his government on this earth, because we're looking at man cannot rule himself without destroying everything in his path. Our destiny, transforming the nation. This is from George Washington. Individuals entering into society must give up a share of liberty to preserve the rest. And it is at times difficult to draw with precision the line between those rights which must be surrendered and those which must be reserved. So you and I are in the same boat spiritually now. When God calls us to be a part of his work in the end time warning of this world, part of your life now has been dedicated and set aside to do God's will, right? To do what God wants us to do in this particular time. And George Washington was showing the people that they had to make a decision. They had to make a choice. You and I are in that time that we have to make a choice. That's what I'm talking about in this new series that I just began. Compare that to Paul, the Apostle Paul. He said he became a slave to obtain freedom. 1 Corinthians 7, verse 22. He says, for he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's free man. Likewise, he that is called being a free man is Christ's servant. So we're called to be a part of being Christ's servant if we are ever to be totally free. Amazing story that you and I are living into right now before the return of Jesus Christ. All right, we got another video here. This is another old-time favorite. This is a little longer. All right, this one's called The Signers of the Declaration. It's about 8 minutes long, but it's an important story to be told because, you see, God's going to call upon some in His called out ones that are going to have to make certain dedications in their lives. Take a look at what the Signers of the Declaration did for their lives.
Americans, the how and the why of our beloved republic are so much better known and understood than the who. The United States of America was born in 1776, but it was conceived 169 years before that. The earliest settlers had watered the New World with much sweat. They had built substantial holdings for themselves, for their families, and when the time came to separate themselves from a tyranny an ocean away, at best it meant starting all over again after the ravages of war. Researching what you're about to hear gave a whole new dimension to my reverence for our nation's first citizens. All others of the world's revolutions, before and since, were initiated by men who had nothing to lose. Nothing to lose. Our founders had everything to lose and nothing to gain, except one thing. But for any eve of the 4th of July, I, Paul Harvey, do herewith bequeath unto you something to remember. You may not be able to quote one line from the Declaration of Independence at this moment. Henceforth, you'll always be able to quote at least one line. It's in the last paragraph where you will recall when I remind you. It says, "We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." In the Pennsylvania State House that's now called Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the best men from each of the colonies sat down together. This was a very fortunate hour in our nation's history, one of those rare occasions in the lives of men when we had greatness to spare. These were men of means, well-educated. 24 were lawyers and jurists. 9 were farmers, owners of large plantations. On June 11, a committee sat down to draw up a Declaration of Independence. We were going to tell the British fatherland no more rule by redcoats. Below the dam of ruthless foreign rule, the stream of freedom was running shallow and muddy, and we were going to light a fuse to dynamite that dam. This pact, as Burke later put it, was a partnership between the living and the dead and the yet unborn. There was no bigotry, there was no demagoguery in this group. All had shared hardships. Jefferson finished a draft of the document in 17 days. Congress adopted it in July, and so much is familiar history. But now, King George III had denounced all rebels in America as traitors. Punishment for treason was hanging. The names now so familiar to you from the several signatures on that Declaration of Independence, the names were kept secret for 6 months, for each knew the full meaning of that magnificent last paragraph in which his signature pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. 56 men placed their names beneath that pledge. 56 men knew when they signed that they were risking everything. They knew if they won this fight, the best they could expect would be years of hardship in a struggling nation. And if they lost, they'd face a hangman's rope. But they signed the pledge. And here is the documented fate of that gallant 56. Carter Braxton of Virginia, wealthy planter, trader, saw his ships swept from the seas. To pay his debts, he lost his home and all of his properties and died in rags. Thomas Lynch Jr., who signed that pledge, was a third-generation rice grower, aristocrat, large plantation owner. After he signed, his health failed. His wife and he set out for France to regain his failing health. Their ship never got to France, was never heard from again. Thomas McKean of Delaware was so harassed by the enemy that he was forced to move his family 5 times in 5 months. He served in Congress without pay, his family in poverty and in hiding. Vandals looted the properties of Ellery and Clymer and Hall and Gwinnett and Walton and Hayward and Rutledge and Middleton. Thomas Nelson Jr. of Virginia raised $2 million on his own signature to provision our allies, the French fleet. After the war, he personally paid back the loans, wiped out his entire estate, and he was never reimbursed by his government. In the final battle for Yorktown, he, Nelson, urged General Washington to fire on his, Nelson's, own home, which was occupied by Cornwallis. It was destroyed. Thomas Nelson Jr. had pledged his life, his fortune, and his sacred honor. The Hessians seized the home of Francis Hopkinson of New Jersey. Francis Lewis had his home and everything destroyed, his wife imprisoned. She died within a few months. Richard Stockton, who signed that declaration, was captured, mistreated, his health broken to the extent that he died at 51. His estate was pillaged. Thomas Hayward Jr. was captured when Charleston fell. John Hart was driven from his wife's bedside while she was dying. Their 13 children fled in all directions for their lives. His fields and grist mill were laid waste. For more than a year he lived in forests and caves and returned home after the war to find his wife dead, his children gone, his properties gone, and he died a few weeks later of exhaustion and a broken heart. Lewis Morris saw his land destroyed, his family scattered. Philip Livingston died within a few months from the hardships of the war. John Hancock, history remembers best due to a quirk of fate rather than anything he stood for. That great sweeping signature attesting to his vanity towers over the others. One of the wealthiest men in New England. And yet he stood outside Boston one terrible night of the war. And he said, "Burn Boston, though it makes John Hancock a beggar, if the public good requires it." So he too lived up to the pledge. Of the 56, few were long to survive. 5 were captured by the British and tortured before they died. 12 had their homes from Rhode Island to Charleston sacked, looted, occupied by the enemy, or burned. 2 lost their sons in the army. 1 had 2 sons captured. 9 of the 56 died in the war from its hardships or from its more merciful bullets. I don't know what impression you had of the men who met that summer in Philadelphia. But I think it's important that we remember this about them. They were not poor men. They were not wild-eyed pirates. These were men of means. They were rich men, most of them, and had enjoyed much ease and luxury in their personal living. Not hungry men, certainly not terrorists, not irresponsible malcontents, not fanatical incendiaries. These men were prosperous men, wealthy landowners. They were substantially secure in their prosperity. They had everything to lose. But they considered liberty, and this is as much as I shall say of it. They had learned that liberty is so much more important than security, that they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And they fulfilled their pledge. They paid the price, and freedom was born.
They fought for freedom. You and I are in a fight for freedom today. This freedom the world doesn't understand. They fought to establish the physical nation of Israel that they didn't even know. You and I today are being called to fight for the freedom that God can give us only through Jesus Christ and the establishment of his kingdom to come. July 4th, in the conclusion of the Declaration, I want to read, we don't ever read the end of it. We always quote the beginning, but we never read the end of it. Watch how they concluded the Declaration. If you haven't seen that in a while, let me bring that to memory. It says, "We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America, in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions." And every time we meet here and we film God's Unchanging Word, News Nuggets and Insights, we ask God as we open this program in prayer before we deliver it, that when it comes out on Friday to you, those who watch our program, that we bring God the glory and the honor that He has given to each one of us, that gives back to Him for this freedom that we're fighting for today. He says, "In the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly published to declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states. They are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may have right to do." And that's how we declared the independence of this great nation. And that's it for our program today, except we got one more video that's going to come. So let's get right into the home office and get to our conclusion video today. In the mail this week, King Hezekiah, I believe this was last week, huh? Or is that this week? This week. That's going out this week. King Hezekiah by Danny Ellis, in the sermon I delivered just a few weeks ago, talking about conspiracies and false prophecies. Also in the mail, July 4th, Independence Day, the newsletter, and the sermon I just delivered last week that you can get your own copy of, July 4th, 1776. Also I want to bring to your attention is a sermon we delivered a couple years ago, is God's jump-off point at the corner of July 4th and Tammuz 17. So what we've been talking about today and our foundation that we just briefly touched on is right here. So I invite you, if you haven't seen that sermon, go online, you can pull it up and you can watch it at home. God's jump-off point is the beginning of the establishment of the United States of America and tying the warnings of ancient Israel to us today. So there you have it. That's our program for today. And as we like to do every single program, we want to close with an uplifting video or song. And today we have God Bless America with Kate Smith. Now this video, you'll see it's been taken out of a movie from way back. You'll recognize some of the stores. But when she sings it, it's the first time it was ever sung on the radio to America. God Bless America. Take a look and I'll be right back to close our program.
Of our program, Miss Kate Smith.
Hello, everybody. It is my happy privilege to introduce a new song, God Bless America. While the storm clouds gather far across the sea, let us swear allegiance to a land that's free. Let us all be grateful for a land so fair, as we raise our voices in a solemn prayer. God bless America, land that I love.
late.
No. White with gold. God bless America. My home.
Right, Pop? Right, son.
God bless America, land that I love. Beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountain to the prairie, to the ocean, white with gold. God bless America.
Kind of makes you think of Blake, doesn't it? Makes you think of a lot of things. We're going to be in this yet, Mom.
Hello, son.
Hi, Mom. Hello, darling.
New song?
Brand new, first time in the air. Brand new, my eye. You know, I threw that song out of Yip Yip Yap Yank 22 years ago. Sounds better now.
Well, that's it for our program today. I hope it's touched you as our little tribute to July 4th, 2020. If you're like us and when you see a program like this and you see our heritage and it doesn't shed a tear every now and then, I don't know. We need to do everything in our power to hold fast to the calling that God's given to each one of us. Because Jesus Christ is coming back. And when he says, when you see these things happening, lift your head high, because you know salvation draws near. And Jesus Christ is coming back. And we want to thank all of you for participating and being a part of our program, for sharing this with all your friends. It's imperative that you help us get these messages out, because you see, they're trying to shut this nation down. And Jesus Christ is not going to allow that. Thanks again for watching. Hope you have a great 4th of July weekend. Until next week, remember, share this with everybody you know. They're going to love you for it. Maybe not. Till next week, God be with you.